right, guys, it is time to do our final Green Bay Packers 53-man roster prediction, as today we are one day away from cutdown day, to where the Packers have to trim their roster from 90 players all the way down to 53 players. And I know we probably say this every year, that it's very hard to craft a 53-man roster, kind of make these predictions, but I truly believe this was the hardest one I had to do in a long time. Like, there was a lot of positions that I went back and forth on, going, okay, this guy definitely should make it, or this guy shouldn't make it, and then going back on it. And that's why I didn't want to do my roster prediction right after that Ravens game, that recency bias from that game. And I wanted to obviously take the entire training camp as a whole, with all three preseason games in effect, to my 53-man roster prediction. So we're going to break down every position today in today's video, and of course we'll compare it to tomorrow's when the real 53-man roster comes out and see how close this prediction is. Guys, my videos will also now be in audio form for wherever you get your podcast. You can find it, just search up my channel name and it'll pop right up. Guys, the start of the NFL season is just under 2 weeks away, where the Packers open up this season in Brazil versus the Philadelphia Eagles. And I'm so excited to finally watch this football team. But what's better than watching the team is actually going to a game. That's where today's video sponsor, SeatGeek, comes in. With over 28 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 ticketing app. There are over 70,000 events on SeatGeek, including sporting events, concerts, festivals, you name it. Personally, I've been to over 20 different Packers games, including 16 different NFL stadiums. And it's always important to not only make sure you find good tickets, but good value tickets. SeatGeek puts all the tickets across the web in one place, so you really know that you're getting a good deal. Each ticket is also rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so look for the green dots. Green means a good deal, red means a bad deal. And of course, I want everyone to be able to go watch a Packers game live. It's truly an amazing experience. So I'm here to hook you guys up with a great deal via SeatGeek. You can get $20 off your first order with code Basaraski. That's $20 off your first order at SeatGeek with my promo code Basaraski. Make sure to also go down in the description, check out SeatGeek, see all the events, concerts, and more importantly, sporting events they have to offer there, and the type of deals you can get on those tickets. All right, so now back into the video. Let's dive down into the first position group. And of course, we're going to start with quarterback. Now, obviously, the main thing here is who will be quarterback number 2. Based off of who's on the roster right now, I believe it's going to be Michael Pratt. I think he overall performed better than Sean Clifford in this offseason. Now, Sean Clifford, being a second-year player, probably has a better mind of the offense overall, and that could also attribute into that. But in terms of performance, through 3 preseason games, through every single training camp practice that we were available to take a look at, Michael Pratt performed better. And Sean Clifford really didn't do anything to make me go, okay, he deserves quarterback number 2. I mean, he was turning over the football a ton in practices as well as preseason games. And they spent draft picks on both of these guys, and they very well could keep 3 quarterbacks. I don't know if they can, based on a lot of the other positions that are so important to keep some of those guys on the roster that can then contribute on special teams. So when you're looking at other positions such as linebacker, wide receiver, cornerback, safety, you know, those guys at the bottom of those positions can play special teams, whereas a third quarterback can't. So I have them practice squatting Sean Clifford. If it's in orange crossed out, that means practice squad, and you'll see in a further position, if it's in red and crossed out, that means they're simply just cut from the roster. You can also keep 16 players on your practice squad. The Packers can keep 17 if the 17th is kicker Alex Hale, as he is now their international player, which I assume they will do. But we'll get into kicker, obviously, later in this video. But in my opinion, Michael Pratt, quarterback number 2. They very well could cut both of these guys and bring in a veteran. They could bring in a veteran and keep Michael Pratt as the third guy. We'll see exactly what goes down, but based off of who they have on the roster right now, my prediction is they keep 2 quarterbacks, Jordan Love and Michael Pratt. Now moving on to running back. I have them at first keeping 3 total running backs, but starting Marshawn Lloyd on the IR with the designation to return. Now the NFL can designate 2 players before the season starts to return off of IR, and that would keep Marshawn Lloyd out a minimum of 4 weeks. He does have a hamstring issue. Those tend to linger, and maybe he'd be ready week 1, but at that point, he hasn't gotten much experience this preseason, only got a couple snaps in that first game, and then that was it. it makes a lot of sense to place him on IR with a designation to return than someone like A.J. Dillon. You know, A.J. Dillon could go all the way up to week 1 with not much practice, but still get into that game and know what he's doing. So I have them keeping Josh Jacobs, A.J. Dillon, and Emmanuel Wilson. A lot of people want and expect Emmanuel Wilson to make this roster. He was the best running back this preseason in terms of backup guys that got a lot of snaps. Obviously, we had guys like Jarvian Howard who are now off the roster. And then you see other 2 players on the roster currently, running back Nate McCrary and Ellis Merriweather. I was more impressed with Nate McCrary over this preseason. I know he kind of came in midway through, but last game, very impressed with the way he ran. So I think he could be a practice squad running back. Ellis Merriweather ran well in the last game as well. All these running backs did. I mean, the running game and run blocking was just phenomenal. But I like the idea of Nate McCrary as the practice squad over Ellis Merriweather. But guys, Emmanuel Wilson should make this roster because right now, the Packers have like one healthy running back other than Emmanuel Wilson. At least that is going to make the roster, and that's Josh Jacobs. A.J. Dillon with his neck stinger, which he had last year, you know, a reoccurring injury, is a little concerning. And then, of course, Marshawn Lloyd with the hamstring. Obviously, that can linger. So I think they have to keep Emmanuel Wilson, just in case, kind of as an insurance. He very well could be running back number 2, week 1 in Brazil. That 100% could happen. So I have them keeping 3 and putting Marshawn Lloyd on the IR, which he wouldn't then count towards the 53-man roster. As for fullback, they did re-sign Henry Pearson recently. I have them keeping him on the practice squad. They did this a lot with him last year, where he's on the practice squad, and they can call him up for game day if they maybe want to utilize him in their upcoming scheme for whatever opponent they're playing. No one's going to claim Henry Pearson. No one's going to claim a fullback off of a practice squad, and they can kind of keep him on there and call him up whenever they need to. They did that a lot with Patrick Taylor last year at running back. So although a player's on a practice squad, it doesn't mean that they can't be utilized in the season. So I don't think they're going to roster Henry Pearson, but I think he's going to be a practice squad guy. Now moving to wide receiver, man. This is one I went back and forth on. And at the end, I ended up with 6 wide receivers. I was so close to keeping 7 wide receivers, but then there was a player on defense that I just couldn't keep off this roster due to his performance in this preseason, which we'll get into. So I have them keeping 6 wide receivers. The first 4 are locks. They didn't even play in the last preseason game. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Tay Wicks. Bo Melton, I believe, is still a lock. You know, he's the backup to Jaden Reed in terms of that slot role wide receiver, that motion man, jet sweep type of wide receiver. Could he potentially be some trade bait for another team? Possibly, but he's going to make the 53-man roster. The big question was wide receiver number 6, and it came down to looking at overall this entire preseason, and it's Grant DuBose for me. I think throughout practice, making a ton of plays. In the first preseason game, easily being the best receiver that day. Second preseason game, third preseason game, not the best, but even in the second preseason game, he made an exceptional special teams tackle, and he's been highlighted on special teams. He's been highlighted as a run blocker. Matt LaFleur said they were teaching the wide receiver room with the film of Grant DuBose from the first game in terms of run blocking as a wide receiver. You don't often get that type of praise if you're a 6th wide receiver on this roster or a 7th wide receiver on this roster. So I have him making it over Malik Heath. Malik Heath was awesome last year. And again, he's going to be a practice squad guy. If they want to call him up, they want bigger type of wide receivers or more run blockers, more special teamers, they can do so. But I think they have to roster 6 wide receivers from the get-go, and I think the 6 is Grant DuBose. They spent a draft pick on him last year. I think Malik Heath has no problem clearing waivers and going to the practice squad. And the other practice squad wide receiver is Samori Toure. Again, he offers some experience on special teams as a punt returner. And, you know, he made a couple nice catches in that last preseason game. He's definitely not going to make the roster, but I think he can remain as a practice squad wide receiver. Now, they could keep us a 3rd practice squad wide receiver. I don't have them doing so. It'd probably be one of Julian Hicks or Dimitri Stanley, but I have them outright cutting Hicks, Stanley, and Jalen Wayne. I think it's almost a guarantee the Packers keep 4 tight ends. I think they're going to be running a lot of 12 personnel this season, so having at least 4 tight ends is pretty much a must, and that's Musgrave, Kraft, Tyler Davis, Ben Sims. A lot of people might say, oh, well, Joel Wilson should make it over Ben Sims, and that very well could happen. I just think Ben Sims has a lot more experience in this offense. He saw a lot of snaps last year. I think he's a good blocker, and I think he just works well in this offense. Joel Wilson did have a couple flashes in the preseason, but also had a couple pretty poor plays in the preseason, especially in that last game. So I have them practice squatting Joel Wilson again. If they want to go heavy tight ends on a week, they can call him up to the active roster. Then I have Messiah Swinson as an outright cut. Didn't really hear much of him at all the entire training camp. At that point, he is the 6th tight end and probably won't even make the practice squad. Now moving into offensive line. This was another one that I kind of flipped back and forth on a couple guys, but we're going to kind of categorize it as tackles, guards, and centers. So we're going to start with tackles, and I have them keeping 4. Zach Tom, Rasheed Walker, Andre Dillard, Kadeem Telfort. Andre Dillard had the highest pass blocking grade of all tackles with 50 or more snaps this preseason, and he took 47 of his snaps at left tackle. I think his spot is at left tackle. Could he traditionally be a swing tackle for the Green Bay Packers? That third guy that can play both spots? Yeah, probably, and that's likely what they see him as. He didn't play in that final preseason game. I believe I saw some comments saying it was due to injury, but I also saw some other comments saying he wasn't injured and they just kept him out because he pretty much locked up that swing tackle spot, and I think he did too. I think he's going to make this 53-man roster as that third tackle. Zach Tom, Rasheed Walker, obviously making this roster. Kadeem Telfort, I think they keep him on the roster due to his versatility. Throughout this training camp this preseason, they were playing him at guard, both guard spots and both tackle spots. I mean, they pretty much put him everywhere, and I thought he's been pretty solid. I think he can be, a 4th tackle on this roster that you could also kick into guard if need be. I have them practice squatting Caleb Jones and Travis Glover and outright cutting Luke Tenuta. They had high expectations for Luke Tenuta last year, even rostering him so they could put him on IR, but I really haven't seen much of him this offseason, and Jones, Glover, Telfort, all those guys have been getting more snaps than Luke Tenuta. So for me, he is the outright cut. Moving into guard, I have them keeping 3. Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, Jordan Morgan. A little light on guard here, but I think overall having Kadeem Telfort, who can swing into guard, I think they're fine. I have them practice squatting Donovan Jennings, who I thought was going to make this roster. I was pretty confident, but then he suffered, I believe, a knee injury. Really didn't practice much. Did play some in this last preseason game, but didn't see many snaps. I think there's going to be no problem getting this guy on our practice squad, and I still like the overall outlook of Donovan Jennings. I think he still can become, a solid guard in the NFL. I just don't think he got much experience this preseason due to the injury. So again, he'll be a practice squad guy, in my opinion, them keeping 3 guards. But again, Kadeem Telfort, kind of that guy that can play tackle, can play guard. We know Zach Tom can play anywhere. Elton Jenkins can kind of play anywhere. So overall, between tackle and guard, we have like 7 players, and I think that's more than enough. I have them outright cutting Royce Newman and Lecitus Smith. Obviously, the Packers could just keep Royce Newman here, and that probably, for a weird reason, will happen. And we're all going to sit here going, okay, why do they continue to keep Royce Newman on the roster? He must have some dirt on Brian Gutekunst, because it simply makes no sense. Honestly, I don't think there's any point to it. I know they reworked his contract, but they can still save money releasing him. And honestly, he was also abysmal against second and third stringers this preseason. So I don't even want to see what he would look like against starters. I mean, we have seen that before, and we just don't want to see it again. Moving over to center, I have them keeping 2. This one's pretty easy. Josh Myers and Jacob Monk. The 2 guys that have played the most center this preseason. Sean Ryan's also played it a bit. Elton Jenkins played it a bit. There's some versatility there. Jacob Monk has also played guard. So again, they have a lot of guys that can play different positions, and I think keeping 9 overall offensive linemen is fine. Sometimes they keep 10, but I think 9 is okay considering all the versatility that you have in this room. So Josh Myers, Jacob Monk at center. Now flipping over to the defensive side of the ball. Defense was a lot harder than offense in my opinion, because there's so many players that performed so well this preseason, and it was hard to keep them on or off the roster. So starting at defensive end, and this is one that could go 2 different ways. The first 4, no question, they're making the roster. Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Lucas Van Ness, JJ Enagbare. 5, I have Brenton Cox Jr. I think the Packers really like him. Although he didn't create a ton of splash plays like Aaron Mosby did, I still think he makes the roster. But this could go another way. They could keep Aaron Mosby on this roster, as the fifth edge player or fifth defensive end. Aaron Mosby had a hell of a preseason. Obviously, that last game, I mean, he did everything possible to say, hey, keep me on this roster. A forced fumble off a sack, an interception. I mean, this guy was everywhere. He's a former off-ball linebacker, so that kind of gives that versatility there at defensive end. If they like that and they want that versatility, and a guy that just simply said, hey, keep me on the roster, look what I can do, they could go Aaron Mosby here over Brenton Cox. But to me, I think Gutekunst values Brenton Cox a little bit more than Aaron Mosby. So I have Mosby and Deslin Alexander going on the practice squad, and I have them outright cutting Brevin Allen, Keyshawn Banks, and Zach Morton. For defensive tackle, I have them keeping 5, and this got a little bit easier. Sadly, when we saw Jonathan Ford get injured in that last game, get carted off to the locker room. I don't know if we have an update on him yet, but considering he was carted to the locker room, pretty much confirms that he probably won't be making this 53-man roster, but the Packers could potentially place him on IR. Will they use the second spot with the designation to return? Not sure. They might, but overall, I don't see him making the 53-man roster as he is injured. So the 5 guys are very easy. Like this has been the same 5, honestly, the entire 2 seasons. Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, TJ Slayton, Carl Brooks, Colby Wooden. Jonathan Ford on IR, and I have them keeping James Esther on the practice squad. Now, if Jonathan Ford is weirdly just okay and that injury was just a random scare and he's completely fine, Jonathan Ford will be the practice squad defensive tackle 100%. But since he's going on IR here, I have them keeping James Esther as the practice squad guy and outright cutting Spencer Weegee and Keontae Shad. Now moving to linebacker, and this is one that for the longest time I had them keeping 5, and I simply just couldn't keep Christian Welch off this roster. Not only will the Packers have more off-ball linebackers moving to a 4-3, they need quality special team players, and Christian Welch is both. Christian Welch had arguably one of the best preseasons of all defenders on this football team, especially that last game. I believe he had like a 94 PFF grade in that last game. Let me know down in the comments if you want me to make a PFF video for last game. I can do that. Quay Walker, Edgerrin Cooper, Isaiah McDuffie, Eric Wilson, Tyron Hopper. Those 5 guys are making the roster, 100%. The question is, do they keep 6 with Christian Welch? Again, I think he offers versatility in terms of a linebacker and a special teams player. Will he be active game day? Probably not, unless they want more special teamers on their initial 46 for a game. I have them practice squatting Chris Russell, who I was impressed with, who was added in the middle of this training camp, teammate of Edgerrin Cooper at Texas A&M. I think he also had a very high-grade game last week, and he was a lot better than Raylan Goforth and Christian Young, in my opinion. Definitely better than Raylan Goforth. I know Christian Young has some special team experience with us last year, but I like the potential of Chris Russell personally, so I have them practice squatting him instead of the other 2. Moving over to cornerback, another spot that the first 5 probably locks. Like, we can all agree that Jair, Stokes, Valentine, Nixon, Ballantyne probably locks on this roster. You could argue that maybe Ballantyne doesn't make it, but the first 4 are definitely making it. And then the question was, do they keep 6? Do they keep Kalen King? Did Kalen King do enough to make this roster? My opinion, yes, he did. He shows versatility, outside-inside versatility. He shows he has the capability to be a run support type of nickel cornerback. And yes, he had some missed tackles this preseason, and that has to get cleaned up. But when it was all on the line, final game of the preseason, make your case to make the roster, Kalen King had one of the best games as a defender, in my opinion. He was making tackles left and right, very formed tackles, a formed tackle where he forced a fumble. He was all over the field, and I liked the thought of him as a depth nickel cornerback. Ballantyne took some snaps this offseason at nickel. Nixon took some snaps at outside this offseason. Of course, you have Javon Bullard who can play some nickel, but you can never have enough of those guys that can kind of just rotate around that defensive backfield and do different things for your defense. So I'm keeping Kalen King on this roster. You know, he fell all the way to the 7th round. I think if the Packers try to get him on their practice squad, I do think another team would snag him. And I know we overvalue players, and that rarely ever happens. But there's only a couple on this roster that I kind of circled and went, I don't know if they'd make it over to the practice squad. I have them practice squatting Robert Rochelle. He was hurt for that last preseason game. I don't think it's a long-term injury, and I think he'll easily go to the practice squad, a great special teamer. And then outright cutting Jamon Green and LJ Davis. Both of these guys was not impressed with at all, especially LJ Davis. I feel like a lot of the big chunk plays late in preseason games was against LJ Davis. Now moving over to safety. This one's pretty easy. I mean, it's almost a guarantee they keep these first 5 guys with Xavier McKinney, Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, Anthony Johnson Jr., and Katana Ladapo. The first 3 didn't even play in that final preseason game. They were always locks, obviously. Anthony Johnson Jr., I think, still a lock. He had an excellent final preseason game and was rotating in with the starters all off season. Like, I just don't see the Packers getting rid of Anthony Johnson Jr. And of course, spending a mid-round draft pick on Katana Ladapo, who really didn't get to participate in this offseason too much with his toe injury he suffered before the draft. He was on the NFI. He finally came in last preseason game. We played the final 2. The last one against the Broncos, I liked what I saw. And this final one, he played a lot as well. And I think, obviously you guys know my thoughts on Katana Ladapo. I think he's great potential. And it would be dumb for the Packers to obviously not keep him on their roster. I have them practice squatting Zane Anderson and Benny Sapp. Zane Anderson, a great special teamer. The Packers very well could just go Zane Anderson over Kalen King just due to special teams. They could do that. Benny Sapp as a special teamer, he's kind of been on the special teams for, I think, the last couple of years. Pretty solid safety there, but obviously I don't see him making the roster. So yeah, have the Packers keeping 5 safeties with McKinney, Bullard, Williams, Johnson Jr., Oladapo, and practice squatting the remaining 2 of Zane Anderson and Benny Sapp. All right, so this is where it gets interesting. We're going into special teams. Honestly, the Packers could realistically go into cutdown day with 1 special team player, and that would be Daniel Whelan, obviously. I have them going into cutdown day keeping 2. They're going to initially keep Anders Carlson on the roster as a backup plan, in my opinion. They're going to practice squad Alex Hale because he's an international player and he won't count towards the 16. He'll be a 17th. Greg Joseph, I think, is going to be the outright cut. If they keep him into week 1, his salary fully guarantees for the year. I don't think they want to do that. Obviously, they're keeping Daniel Whelan, and I have them keeping no long snapper. Now, this could be the other way around. They keep Matt Orzech, and they keep 0 kickers and just wait to see what comes onto the market because obviously a lot of teams have 2 kickers. They're not going to keep 2. So a lot of kickers are going to be released, and the Packers will have a pool of kickers that they can go, okay, which one are we going to bring in and try to get them ready and up to speed for week 1 in Brazil. I personally think they keep Anders Carlson, and if another kicker happens to get cut that they're like, wow, didn't expect that, let's get this guy on the roster, then they make that swap. But I don't know if they'll go no kicker into 53-man roster cutdown day and just be like, okay, hopefully a good one's cut. I just don't see the Packers playing that way. They very well could. Long snapper, they could play that way because it is important, but there's going to be plenty of options there. You could just bring back Peter Bowden, who was with you the entire offseason and honestly should have won the job, in my opinion. But Matt Orzech somehow still on the roster, but I just don't have him making it. And doing this, only keeping 2 special teams players rather than 3, allows you to keep someone else on the roster day 1, like a Christian Welch or like a Kalen King. And I kept both of them. So they could very well, like I said, only keep Daniel Whelan and then also keep 7 receivers and just keep Malik Heath, Grant DeBose on the roster. Now, obviously, that'll have to change the moment they sign a kicker and sign a long snapper. Then they'll have to cut 2 players. But it kind of allows them to keep them on the roster right off the bat. And if they, say, have an injury, then they can IR the player, something of that sort. Kind of like play around with the roster to keep players on it, right? They did it with Luke Tenuta last year, so there's definitely some options here on this roster. But I have them keeping Anders Carlson, obviously Daniel Whelan, but going into the season or going into Tuesday, tomorrow, without it. So that is my final Green Bay Packers 53-man roster prediction. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Again, this was a very, very hard one to do, and it's always difficult. Every year it's difficult, but I don't think I've done as much flip-flopping on any other roster prediction the last, 3 years, the last 3 times I've done them. So this one was very difficult. I'm probably going to be wrong. I think everyone on the internet will probably be wrong. I don't think there's going to be a single person that actually nails this 53 out of 53, but I'm hoping I'm pretty close. We'll take a look at that tomorrow when it is released at, I think, 4 Eastern or could be 5 Eastern, when the actual transaction wire releases and we see what the actual 53-man roster is. Of course, I'll make a video instantly right after that, breaking that down, kind of comparing it to this one, of course, and going over everything else. But I appreciate you guys coming by to the channel. If you could, please leave a like down below. It supports the channel a ton and absolutely free to do. I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching, and as always, go Pack Go.